Pride and Prejudice, probably the most popular of Austen's Finnish novels, was also, in a sense, the first to be composed. The original version, First Impressions, was completed by 1797. The work was rewritten around 1812 and published in 1813 as Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice sold fairly well. The first edition sold out at about 1,500 copies. Jane Austen's work display little evidence of the Romantic movement. They also reveal no awareness of the international upheavals and consequent turmoil in England that took place during her lifetime. Pride and Prejudice continues to be popular today not only because of its memorable characters and the general appeal of the story, but also because of the skill with which it is told. Austen displays a masterful use of irony, dialogue, and realism that support the character development and heighten the experience of reading the novel. The summary of Pride and Prejudice. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet had 5 daughters, and Charles Bingley, a rich single man, moves to the Netherfield estate. The neighborhood residents are thrilled, especially Mrs. Bennet, who hopes to marry one of her 5 daughters to him. When the Bennet daughters meet him at a local ball, they are impressed by his outgoing personality and friendly disposition. They are less impressed, however, by Bingley's friend Fitzwilliam Darcy, a land-owning aristocrat who is too proud to speak to any of the locals and whom Elizabeth Bennet overhears refusing to dance with her. Bingley and the oldest Bennet daughter, Jane, soon form an attachment. Any serious relationship between the two, however, is opposed by Bingley's sisters, who do not approve of Jane as a wife for Bingley because of her mother's lower status, and by Darcy, who believes that Jane is indifferent to Bingley. Darcy finds himself attracted to Elizabeth despite his objections to her family. He is drawn to her spirited wit and expressive eyes, and Caroline Bingley's jealous criticism of Elizabeth can do nothing to lessen Darcy's admiration. Darcy grows more interested in Elizabeth, and Elizabeth continues to despise him and is instead attracted to George Wickham, a handsome and personable militia officer. Wickham tells Elizabeth that his father worked for Darcy's father and that he and Darcy grew up together, stating that he was favored by Darcy's father. Wickham claims that Darcy disobeyed his father's bequest of a clergyman's revenue to Wickham out of selfish resentment. Wickham's tale makes Darcy appear not only proud but cruel, and Elizabeth accepts Wickham's account without question, disliking Darcy even more because of it. In the midst of Jane and Elizabeth developing relationship, the Bennet family is visited by Mr. Bennet's cousin, William Collins, a clergyman who will inherit Mr. Bennet's estate when he dies because of a legal stricture known as an entail. Full of apologies for the entail and praises for his patroness, Lady Catherine de Bow. Mr. Collins informs that Mrs. Bennet that Lady Catherine has instructed him to marry and that he plans to choose a wife from the Bennet daughters. He settles on Elizabeth but is stunned and offended when she refuses him. He quickly turns his attention to Elizabeth's friend, Charlotte Lucas, who wants to marry for security rather than love, and the two are soon engaged and married. At the same time, Jane is dismayed to find out that Bingley and the entire Netherfield Park have unexpectedly left for London. Caroline Bingley writes to Jane that they do not intend to return, and she predicts a match between Bingley and Darcy's sister, Georgiana, who is also in London. Jane quietly resigns herself to a life without Bingley. Elizabeth is angry for her sister and suspects that Bingley's sisters and Darcy are trying to keep him from Jane. Elizabeth visits Charlotte at her home in Hunsford, Kent, and meets Colin's patroness and Darcy's aunt, Lady Catherine de Bow, an overbearing woman who thrives on meddling in people's lives. Soon after Elizabeth's arrival in Kent, Darcy visits his aunt with his cousin Colonel Fitzwilliam. Darcy puzzles Elizabeth with his behavior. He seems to seek out her company, but he never says much. One day, he surprises Elizabeth by proposing to her. Still repelled by his pride and believing Darcy is responsible for Bingley's separation from Jane and for Wickham's situation. A careful examination of the facts reveal that Darcy, while proud, is innocent of wrongdoing, leaving Elizabeth mortified at her discovery of how her own pride prejudiced her against Darcy. After returning home for a month, Elizabeth goes on a trip with her aunt and Uncle Gardiner to Derbyshire, where they visit Darcy's estate of Pemberley. There they meet Darcy unexpectedly and are surprised at how graciously he treats them. He calls on Elizabeth at her inn, introduces her to his sister, and invites her to Pemberley for dinner. Darcy is still in love with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth begins to have similar feelings for him. In the midst of this promising situation, Elizabeth receives 2 letters from Jane telling her that Lydia has eloped with Wickham, causing Elizabeth and Gardiners to leave home for immediately. Elizabeth fears that Lydia and the Bennet family are permanently disgraced, and her newly discovered love for Darcy is hopeless. When Lydia was found, she and Wickham married. After the wedding, Elizabeth discovers that Darcy was instrumental in orchestrating the marriage, thereby saving the reputation of the other Bennet daughters. Bingley returns to Netherfield and soon asks Jane to marry him. Jane, of course, accepts, and Mrs. Bennet's exultation is only lessened by her irritation at Darcy's occasional presence. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's happiness for her sister is interrupted by a visit from Lady Catherine de Bow, who has heard a rumor that Darcy and Elizabeth are engaged, which they are not. She lectures Elizabeth on the imprudence of such a match and then demands that Elizabeth promise not to accept any proposal from Darcy. Elizabeth refuses, causing Lady Catherine to tell Darcy about Elizabeth's impertinence, to scold about the folly of an engagement between them. Lady Catherine's description of Elizabeth's response to her demands give Darcy hope that Elizabeth has had a change of heart. He proposes again and Elizabeth happily accepts, and they soon get married. Thank you.